In 2016, I went on a solo road trip across the United States and back. I left from Los Angeles, went down kind of through the southern states, all the way over to Florida, up to Maine, and then across, back across to Seattle, and then all the way down the coast, back to Los Angeles. I was gone from April 17th to June 30th, 2016. I covered 11,645 miles. That's approximately 194 hours and 23 minutes of driving time. 29 states visited, 74 days on the road, approximately $2,000 spent in gas money, 48 different beds that I slept in, 0 speeding tickets, and just under 1,000 photographs taken and edited by me. I didn't really do any video content on this trip. All I have to show is a bunch of pictures, and I'm hoping that that can tell the story. My first pit stop was at a little cheap motel in Nevada, and I was staying near the Hoover Dam. The Hoover Dam was actually more impressive than I thought it was going to be. I wasn't like super excited to see it, but it's actually extremely impressive and huge, and actually a pretty cool sight to see. My first real attraction was the Grand Canyon in Arizona. I remember going up to the rim of the canyon on one of the lookout points and just like my eyes started tearing up. And I think it was a combination of like truly vast and like beautiful nature, but also just the fact that I felt independent and I was excited for this journey that I had laid out for myself, and I was proud of myself for doing it alone and just being brave and being there. After the Grand Canyon, I started going north through Arizona, and my next stop was going to be Utah. I stopped on the way at Antelope Canyon, which I believe is like kind of toward the northern border of Arizona, like almost going into Utah. You have to go on a tour to see it because I guess there's like flash floods and kind of extreme weather conditions where they want you to not just waltz in there alone. So I just like booked a tour at this random gas station, and they organize it, pick you up, take you out there. It's also pretty crowded there, so getting a shot without people in it is a little bit of a challenge. After Antelope Canyon, I made my way through Utah, and my destination was Bryce National Park. I went to Temple Square, which at the time was blooming, like overflowing with tulips and other kinds of flowers. I believe this would have been toward like the end of April. After Utah, it was over to Colorado. I had an amazing time in Colorado Springs. This was my first time to Colorado. I stayed at an adorable bed and breakfast, which I'll definitely link below. It's called 4 Mile Creek in Colorado Springs. There's the main house, which is where I stayed, but then there's also like a barn and like some little converted cottages, and there's a creek on the property and gorgeous food, and it was so cozy. After Colorado Springs, I drove over to Denver and actually met a friend there, and we carried on for several hundred miles together throughout Denver and then down through New Mexico and Santa Fe. I didn't take a ton of pictures in this leg of the journey. Highlight of Santa Fe, I would say, is the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. After that, I moseyed across through Texas, humongous state, obviously, a lot of driving time. I do want to note that I didn't like driving each day more than like maybe 3 hours. I tried to make it to big cities and like interesting points, but sometimes I would just stay somewhere just because it was, you know, on the way to somewhere else, and I didn't want to drive for like 8 hours straight. This is a good point to mention Road Trippers, which is the app that I used to plan out this entire trip. It maps out how many miles you're going to drive. It can estimate like how much gas money you're going to spend. It can point out points of interest along your route. I pretty much mapped out everything using this app. When I originally mapped out this whole road trip, I was going to hit all 48 states, and that was the plan in 72 days. By the time I got to about Austin, Texas, I was feeling like a little bit rushed in each location. You know, I would have like 1 or 2 nights in each place. But by the time I got there, I was like, okay, I could rush through like just to say that I went to Oklahoma, or I could, you know, just extend my stay here by a day or 2 and spend more time in the places that I'm really enjoying. So that's ultimately what I decided to do. Okay, if I remember correctly, after Texas, I went to Arkansas because I have family there and I stayed with my great aunt who I'd actually never met. It was a really sweet trip. It was in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then I moseyed over to Mississippi. I don't remember a lot about Mississippi. The real fun came by the time I got to Louisiana and was in New Orleans. This is one of the places that I'd never been before, and I wanted to stay a lot longer. I splurged a little bit and stayed at the Ace Hotel. I had so much fun taking pictures at that hotel and just around New Orleans, which is full of good food. Like, all I did there was eat and listen to music on street corners and stroll around the French Quarter. Amazing city. Right after I left New Orleans, I went to Alabama, and sometimes I'll go to a city or a place just because I like the Airbnb. The place was on a farm. It was kind of like a farm stay, but they had like this little cabin that was separate from the main house, and it was, I think, like 11 miles from the nearest food source. So it was out there in the boondocks. So I did only stay there for one night because I was on my way to Florida. I remember this being one of the really long stretches of driving that I did. Nothing crazy, maybe like 5 or 6 hours, but I had another family member, a cousin who lived in Panama City, Florida, so that was my stay there. And then I was finally over to the East Coast. I went through Savannah, Georgia. I went out to this island. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll have to put it up on the screen. It was very remote and relaxing and had those Spanish moss trees. It was pretty. Then I believe I kind of raced through the Carolinas to get to Washington, D.C., nation's capital. Pretty cool. This part, New England, still confuses me, but I think right after DC, I went on to New York City, and I have family also out in Long Island, so I was able to stay with them. And my cousin told me that we have to go see Montauk, and we have to get there by sunrise. Mornings are not my thing, but she insisted, so we drove out there when it was dark and actually got to see the sunrise. And I love these pictures. I'm really glad we went there. I'm only in it for the pictures. There was Rhode Island, there was Boston, Massachusetts. I met my mom in Maine. She joined me for a little leg of the journey. We went to Arcadia National Park and stayed at a beautiful bed and breakfast. I took a lot of photos there because I was obsessed with the decor and the coziness. We went back down through New Hampshire and Vermont, and I have some more family in Ithaca, New York, which is upstate New York, so we stayed there for a couple days. Though I've been before, Ithaca is a very underrated town with more restaurants per capita than New York City. After Ithaca, we went over to Cleveland, Ohio, which was kind of just a pit stop, really, but we went to see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because we were really just trying to hightail it over to Chicago, where we spent quite a few days. Madison, Wisconsin. Did you know that Madison, Wisconsin is on an isthmus? After the Twin Cities, you start hitting some really long stretches of driving. South Dakota, Montana, big states, lots of driving. Mount Rushmore, tourist attraction, but still pretty cool to see. I mean, there's a reason why some places are tourist attractions. It's because they're cool. I went there, saw some humongous presidents carved into the side of a mountain. I stayed inside Custer National Park. Actually, it might not be a national park. I think it's a state park. In any event, it's awesome. I've never seen so much bison. I don't know if those words are interchangeable. Are those the same animal? I drove all the way across the state of Wyoming, then cut up into Montana to get to Yellowstone. which is the motherland of national parks. I have to say, probably my favorite nature spot in the entire country. One of the coolest parts to me was the geothermal activity, where like something, I'm no scientist, but something about the heat from the earth and how it mixes with like certain chemicals or sulfur or something creates these beautiful patterns of color, like ochre orange and turquoise and yellow, like mustardy yellow, beautiful colors. I don't even know how this happens in nature, but it does. In Yellowstone, I rented a campground for a night, and the only camping situation I had was my vehicle. So I slept in my car. Not the most comfortable situation. I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a proper kind of camper van situation. But basically I just kind of reclined the front seat and used a pillow and my blankets. But even in June, which it was June by the time I got to Yellowstone, it was cold at night. Like I think it dropped down into the 40s. I had to turn on my car every few hours and like crank the heat. And it, you know, not the best night of sleep that I've ever had, but it worked and it was cheap. So I cut through Idaho to get over to Seattle, and Mount Rainier is another national park, which was way up there. Mount Rainier is just this fern gully wonderland. I mean, everything is covered in moss, and there's mountains and there's snow and there's waterfalls, and everything is so green and it is beautiful. And I ran around in there like I was in a fairy tale wonderland forest. Spent some time in Seattle, had a cool Airbnb there, had to hit up Portland. You know, whenever I saw the state signs, I would try to pull over and take a picture when I crossed the border into a new place. And when I got back to California, I was so excited. I'm really happy right now. I made it! So I've been across the US and back, and can't say it! Oh, but I'm gonna. The West Coast is the best coast. Like, it just felt so good to be home because, you know, I was only gone for a couple months, but I drove across the United States and back. I mean, that was quite a feat, and I felt so accomplished and I don't know, just happy and proud of myself for making it back home. Northern California, Mendocino County, beautiful place. After that, I basically just moseyed right down the coast. I stopped in San Francisco, had some friends there, and then after that, I think I was in Monterey or Pebble Beach for a night because my parents happened to be there. And then before I knew it, 72 days later from when I left, I was back where I started. Mendocino Market, I stumbled across this place when I was in Mendocino County, California. I think I was really just after a $4 Subway sandwich, but so happy that I couldn't find a Subway because the avocado sandwich that I ended up getting was all that and a bag of chips. And I do think I also got a bag of chips on top of the avocado pesto sandwich, was all that and a bag of chips. Yeah, find this little deli if you're ever in Mendocino County. This is when I wasn't a vegetarian yet, but at Lowell's at Pike Place Market in Seattle, I had fresh fish tacos while overlooking that Grand Pacific Ocean. I went to Nina's Coffee Cafe in St. Paul, Minnesota. I came here twice, once for the grilled cheese, which, pardon my lack of eloquent vocabulary, was bomb. Second time for a morning coffee and steel-cut oats alongside a solid Wi-Fi connection. Cannot ask for much more than that. We have the Carriage House in Ithaca, New York. It has atmosphere. It has brie stuffed French toast and A+ coffee. Tia Sophia's in Santa Fe for breakfast burritos. Then there's the NOLA restaurant in New Orleans, which is one of Emeril Lagasse's restaurant. Both the food and the service were super top notch. The host and the server asked for my name and remembered it throughout the entire evening. Here's your Merlot, Katie. Those biscuits will be right out. Oh my gosh, there's more New Orleans food on here. Okay, New Orleans beignets and coffee. There are quite a few places to get your beignets in New Orleans, but I chose this one because I read that it could be less crowded than others. And it was not a person in sight. The best part, though, is that you can walk right across the street with your beignets in a paper bag and sit on a bench overlooking the steamboats of the Mississippi River. The Mighty Cone, if you're in Austin, food truck scene. The fried pickles. That's all you need to know about that. To wrap things up here and to make a long story short, I do not think 72 days is enough time to hit up all 48 states. All in all, I visited 29 and briefly drove through a few more. Before this trip, I'd only been to 5 states. So that's it. That's my video. USA road trip. If you're thinking about doing this trip, you should check out my Road Trippers map, which I'll link below. Another question that I get asked a lot is if it's scary to do this kind of thing by yourself, or did you get lonely? And no, the answer is no. For me, I did not get lonely. I had people to visit along the way, and there's actually something really nice about the open road and lots of time to think. There's audiobooks, there's podcasts, there's music that you don't need to ask anyone else if they want to listen to it or not, because you call all the shots, and that's pretty amazing.